Alrighty there, fellow mini painters and lovers of all things old hammer related, and welcome to another video from Nostalgiahammer Hobbies. In this video, I'm going to be taking what is for me one of the most iconic army specific special units out of 2nd edition 40k, the Blood Angels Death Company. We are going to be stripping back some old miniatures back to bare metal, then we're going to be giving them a colour scheme that is jumping out straight from the 2nd edition Angels of Death codex, and then at the end of this video, we're going to be having a little bit of fun with some decals. So let's get to it. Before we get started with stripping back these miniatures to bare metal, it does bear saying that not all miniatures need stripping. Sometimes the paint jobs aren't too bad, and other times you can just paint straight over them. But I still reckon personally that it does bear stripping them straight back, because it's good to start from the bare canvas. So to start with, what I did was I put my elbow grease degreaser into the ultrasonic cleaner over the Death Company. Covered it over and let it run quite a few times. Now, I'm starting to think that elbow grease isn't necessarily possibly the best one to strip. So I'm thinking of doing a comparison video in the future between various different chemicals. So if anyone is interested in that, put that in the comments below and say whether you'd like me to do that. Now, after quite a few run-throughs, I think this was about 48 hours in total of soaking and multiple runs through with the elbow grease. I also changed out to some newer elbow grease, because I don't think this stuff is reusable. I mean, it's cheap enough so that it doesn't really matter, but it's always better to know that you can reuse or not. Once they had all gone through the ultrasonic cleaner, and as much of the paint was stripped off as I could possibly get off, I put them all back together again, and a little trick to do with the plasma pistols and bolt pistol arms on the right hand arm is to cut the hand off at the wrist and turn the hand round almost 90 degrees so it looks like he's holding it to the side, so that way you don't get the pistol sticking out that little butt that you always used to get. Now that I've got these boys stripped back to their bare metal and plastic and reassembled, it's time for me to start thinking about applying a paint to these. Now, when you look at some of the original books that came in the 40k box game, you'll see that your typical Blood Angel has bright red armour, with the colour of the helmet denoting what unit type it is. So blue for Devastator, yellow for an Assault, and a matching red for a Tactical Squad. But when we get to the Angels of Death Codex, we'll see that the Death Company is unique amongst the Blood Angels army, and that their armour is jet black to denote their descent into the Black Rage. So with this in mind, we're going to start with a primer layer of matte black by a company called Highcoat. The reason I like this particular black is because it's a very good match for Abaddon black. So I don't have to give it an all over coat of Abaddon black over whatever primer I've used, ready for the inevitable touch-ups that I'm going to have to do through the painting process. Now, from here, it should be relatively quick. So I'm just going to list the paints that I'm using as I go through the painting process, so you can follow along. First colour I'm going to use is Xandri Dust, which I'm going to use as a base coat on all the skulls and the Aquillas on their chests. Just work through, going over them, apply a couple of nice thin coats over it, not too thick so you don't fill in any detail. After that it's the red, which we are going to do the same as I do the red for the Predator tank and most other reds, which will be a base coat of Mephiston red over everything like the eyes, blood drops and the plasma pistols and bolt pistols, and then over that we will do a coat of Evil Sun's Scarlet straight over that as a layer. Next up is Caliban Green, which we'll be doing on the lenses on the power fists, the laurels that are on their shins and some of them on the helmets, as well as the plasma coils on the plasma guns. And then after that, it would be Warg Flesh, which I use on the grenades, and the cables that are on the power fist. Over the Caliban Green, we are going to brighten that up with some Cabalite Green, just to give it a touch more brightness before we put any wash over it. Then we're going to do some Dryad Bark over the weapon holsters and pouches that are around the models, Then we're going to give it a coat of Calidor Sky over the power swords, ready for doing a layer of wash over that one. And then finally what we're going to do is on the plasma coils, on the plasma pistols, we are going to take some Warpstone Glow and get a brush with a nice point to it, and instead of trying to follow all the little individual lines on there, just do little tick flicking motions with your paintbrush, building it up towards the edge. And just keep going backwards and forwards with that, building it up. And then do the same on the top of the plasma pistol. Basically go from the centre of it and work out towards the edge, building it up, flicking the green, your paintbrush on there, backwards and forwards with it, building up the colour. And what you'll do is you'll slowly build up a sort of a glow effect as you go. After the green, we're going to tackle the metallics. So that will be lead belcher for the areas on the plasma pistol, grills and pipes, anything like that. And for the little bolters in the clips of the bolt pistols, we'll be using Balthazar Gold. Now that we've got most of the base colours down, we're almost ready to put the washes on. But we've got one final touch to do, and that is all the Death Company markings on there, like the crosses on their shoulder pads, some on their knee pads, and they'll have the occasional blood drop here or there. So the final stage we're going to do is those. So let's go back to it, get them done, and then it's time for the washes and some extra little fun bits to finish it off. When it comes to doing the markings on the Death Company, the way I like to do it is to use some Mephiston Red to start out with, thin down, maybe a little bit more than you normally would for doing a base colour. And I like to start off by trying to find the centre of where I'm going to put the X. So for this it's the shoulder pad to start out with. And then from there, you just slowly work out from that centre point, like carefully drawing in that line. It doesn't have to be majorly neat to begin with, because we can tidy it up afterwards, and we're going to thicken it up as it goes as well. So you're going to work from the centre like that down to the corner, and it doesn't have to be super neat, like I said. And you work from the other from that central point again down to the next corner, and you work your way through. Then once you've done that, you follow the lines straight the way up to connect all the way through it. And then once you have done that, you move on to the power fists, and the power fists are a little bit easier. What you can do is, again, find your central point on a power fist, and then draw the line from that down to the bottom two rivets that are just there on it. And then from that point, from the central point, you then work up, and again, just thicken it out. Now for the blood drops, it's a little bit different, but not too difficult, not too dissimilar. What you do is you just draw a central line down for how big you're going to want the blood drop to do, and then just fill it out until you get to the desired shape. And again, you don't have to be super neat when you do it, because you can just tidy up around the edges with some Abaddon Black. Plus we are also going to hit this with some Evil Sun Scarlet, which is going to help with tidying it up a little bit as well. When doing the Death Company markings on the jump packs, it's quite simple actually. You just go from one corner of the top to the other corner. Do it across again, slowly building it up to the right thickness. And now that we've got all the Death Company markings roughed in to begin with a Mephiston Red, what we are going to do is go over these with some Evil Sun Scarlet. Now, a good trick I found is if you try and get this Evil Sun Scarlet into the kind of the middle of the Mephiston Red, it starts to lend a sort of 3D effect to it, which can look quite good. Just keep going in there with thin down paint and just get it in there and just go as neat as you can. But again, we're going to tidy up with some Abaddon Black afterwards when we're finished. So also do the same for the blood drops there. To finish off the Death Company markings, we are going to use some Abaddon Black to just tidy up along the edges of the lines like that. Just draw them in and just neaten it up as you go. And it also helps to add a little bit of a separation in the lines across the shoulder pads and on the knees. We'll also do the same around any blood drops that are there. Just use the black just to help refine it and do the final touches to it. And then once we've gone around doing all that, we shall be ready to do the washes, which then leads to the final touches of the edge highlights. For the washes, we're only going to want to use 4 of them. And to begin with, that's going to be Agrax Earthshade, which we're going to put over all of the bone details, such as the aquillas and the surrounds for the gems and the weapon pouches. Then we're going to use some Quelia Green Shade to go over the laurels, the green pipes on the side of the Power Fist, and any lenses, such as the Power Fist themselves on the Power Fist. And when it comes to the green plasma coils on the plasma pistols, what you're going to do is, instead of putting the green wash all over it, we're going to concentrate on getting the green wash just into the edges of it, just guide it in there. Then it's going to be some Carroburg Crimson, which we're just going to do over the eye lenses and over the jewels. And then to finish it off, it's going to be some Nuln Oil to go over all the metallic parts, including the jump pack. Now that we've got all the base coats and washes down on these, we're almost at the final stage of these, which is highlights and decals. One of my favourite things to do is look through old White Dwarfs and the old codexes at the heavy metal team paint jobs. And one of the things I've always noticed and always loved is the edge highlights that they always give to it. So with this in mind, what we're going to do is we are going to grab our most pointy paintbrush that we've got, and we're going to go in and we're going to do some edge highlights. And once we've done them, it's just decals to finish. So, let's go! When it comes to doing the edge highlights and the other highlights in general, you're going to want to get yourself a good thin pointy brush. For this one, I personally like a size 0 Rosemary & Co. Now, we're going to start with some Sybarite Green for doing it on any of the laurels. And just pick out the little ends of them nice and carefully. Take your time on this. This is the finishing touches, and the more time you take, the better it will look at the end. Then, once we have done the laurels, we're then going to move on to the lenses on the Power Fist, which we are going to start off by using some Moot Green, just to place it just around the bottom edge of them, and a little dot just in the top corner, and then finish that off with a dot of White Scar just at the top, just to give it a little bit of finish. After that, we are then going to start doing the red, which we are going to use Wild Rider Red for that. And when it comes to doing these edge highlights, the little tip I can give is to angle the model so that you're always trying to do it vertically from top down, so it's a little bit easier just to do the lines nicely. And just go along slowly and just basically be slower and more deliberate than you actually need to be. And after a while, you'll find that with practice you'll just speed up as you go. When it comes to the eye lenses and the gems, what I like to do is take the Wild Rider Red and just on the eye lenses start at the back corner and do a little line across the bottom of the lenses. And then for any jewels that are on there, just go down into the bottom corners of any gems and just add a neat sort of dot of the Wild Rider Red and work it round the bottom gradient of it. And to do the Death Company markings, just put your highlight on the upper edge of all the X's, and that'll add a nice little finishing touch to them. Once we've done that, it's now on to doing the bone. So we're going to start off with Ushapti Bone, and just again take your pointy brush and just very carefully go over it. Take your time and go over it, leaving the Agrax Earthshade in the recesses of everything. And just take your time and go nice and slow. We're also going to do that on the edges of all the jewels that are on the armour. And then when we've done the Ushapti Bone, we're going to finish that off with a final little point highlight of Screaming Skull, which we are just going to put on the very tips of the jewel surrounds and some tiny bits on the Aquila wings. I use Gorthor Brown to go around all the ammo pouches and weapon holsters for a highlight. Then what I did was layered lead belcher back over all the metallics to bring back that metallic shine that gets taken away when you add the Nuln Oil over there. Then we want some Lauren Forest to go over the cabling on the power fists. And then I completely forgot this earlier, and as I go through the footage I realise this. So what we also do for all the cabling in between the joints on the power armour, I base coated them with Mechanicus Standard Grey, gave them a wash of Nuln Oil along with all the metallics, and now for an edge highlight I am going to be using Dawn Stone for a highlight on these ones. And now finally we come to edge highlighting all the black, which is pretty much the last bit of edge highlighting we've got to do before we start doing the plasma coils and the power swords and decals or anything like that to finish off. Now, quite often your standard go-to would be Dark Reaper or Mechanicus Standard Grey if you're using your Games Workshop colours to do edge highlight on black. But I often think that if you're going just a single colour edge highlight, it's nice sometimes to step it up that little bit higher, just to make the edge highlight stand out a little bit more. So with that in mind, I like to use Thunderhawk Blue to go around the black edge highlighting on these ones. And again, just stick with your nice fine brush and just keep orientating the miniature around. So on some areas you can use the edge of your brush to skim around the edges. And then on other edges, like the inside of shoulder pads, just steadily do it again, just trying to keep your paintbrush going from vertically, going top down with it. And then when we've done these, we are on to the plasma coils on the plasma pistols and the power sword, and then decals to finish off. Now that all the edge highlights are finished off, we can move on to some ordinary highlights and the finishing touches. And now we get to highlighting the plasma coils on the plasma pistol. To do this, what I start out with is some moot green, and do it similar to the way you started off with the emerald green initially on there, and just with your size 0 brush or whichever brush you're using, just slowly flick the brush from the centre out to the edge and go backwards and forwards slowly, like slowly lowering the brush until it's just touching the plasma coils, and just work backwards and forwards as you build it up. And what you'll find is you start to build up quite a nice little glowing effect. Then once we've done the moot green, the next one is going to be Gauss Blaster green to finish it off. And that's exactly the same way really, but much smaller little ticks going on with your paintbrush. And just do that basically right on the edge. And just again work backwards and forwards with it, building it up slowly, and try and concentrate a little bit more into the centre as you go. And then by the time it's done, I think you've got quite a nice retro looking plasma coil there. One final thing before we get to the power swords is on some of them you will find some scroll work on there. And for those, what I did was a base coat of Rakarth Flesh with a wash of Agrax Earthshade over the top of that. I then reapply Rakarth Flesh over that to build it back up, and then give it an edge highlight of Pallid Witch Flesh to finish it off. And then we can finally get to the power swords, which is the final bit of highlighting before we do the decals. For the power swords, what I do is I take some Lothern Blue to go over the Calador Sky, and I thin it down very, very thin, like you can see there on my thumbnail. Now, what you want to do with this is you can see where the edge is sculpted onto the power sword. So what you want to do is along there, go from just above the bottom of the blade edge on it, and work your way up towards it. And you're going to want to do this in a few layers, quite thin layers, and let each one dry or else the paint will tear. So like that, just work your way up. It looks thick, but remember it does also dry a lot darker than it would normally do. And then once you've done a few coats of that and it's dried, you're then going to go in with some Blue Horror. And again, we're going to thin that down a bit. We're going to glaze it on, kind of layer it on and glaze it on. Up towards the top, doing less of it, like almost to the very top of it, like that. We're going to build that up until you've got something like that, and then we are going to do a pure white edge highlight around it to complete the power blade. And now we're on to the final touches, which is the decals, and then it's basing. As it can be a bit hard sometimes to get hold of original second edition decals, and also when you do find them they can either be a little bit expensive or they're just corroded with age, it's quite a good idea to go to eBay to find your decals that you want. Now, the ones on the dark blue film there, I got from a company called The Mighty Brush. I'm not affiliated with or sponsored by them in any way, shape or form, but I've been using their decals for quite a while, and from my experience, they're extremely good quality. And I highly recommend them, so I will try and put a link in the description below for their website. For the ones on the lighter blue film, I again got off eBay. They're from a Chinese seller. I can't really put a link down on in the description for those ones, but if you just look through eBay you'll find them, and again they're still pretty good quality. Now, one of the things you can do with decals is, if you want one that's slightly different to what you have, is you can adapt existing decals. So the way to do that is, before you get the decals wet, sort of score around the decal film to try and remove the part that you don't want. And then that way, when you get the decal wet and you slide it off, the part that you don't want you can slide off and just get rid of, and the part that you do want you can keep and slide onto the model that you want. For putting decals on, a pair of tweezers I like are these ones, and they are closed when you let them go, and you have to press them to open them. So that way you can hold on to the decal without having to actually pinch the tweezers shut, which makes life a lot easier for you. Now, before you put your decals on the surface of your miniature, you want to give it a good coat of gloss varnish over the top before you put any decals on there, which I didn't do in my first video, and I regret my choices when it comes to that, because decals stand out when you don't. Now, once you've got your decals wet and they're ready to slide off, pinch them together like that with your tweezers, and like I said, it makes it a lot easier with those particular tweezers. And I use micro set. So over the gloss varnish, before you put the decal down, put a little bit of micro set down on the shoulder pad or wherever it is you want to put your decal, and then just slide the decal onto where it is, where you want it, just like that. And you can go through and do that with all the other different decals that you got to go on here. And then once the decals have gone on and the micro set has cured off a little bit, you want to use micro sol to do it, which will help the decals to conform to the shape of the miniature you're doing on, especially for things like shoulder pads, where you'll often get a bit of creasing in the decal. If you put a couple of coats of micro sol on there, or any sort of decal softener, and just roll it out when you do it, right? Use a paintbrush or cotton bud or something. When you do it, don't slide it about, like try and roll it around so you can roll the creases out. And then after that, after you've got all your decals on, then put a coat of matte varnish over the top of it. You can use Games Workshop's Lamia Medium for this. I use a Winsor & Newton Galleria range of varnish, just because I can put it through my airbrush, and it's a lot simpler for me for doing that. And then once the matte varnish has dried, we're going to do a little bit of a spruce up job on the decal on the Power Fist. So let's do that. Once the matte varnish has cured, you can see that the decals have pretty much blended in seamlessly with the black power armour. You can't see those horrible decal outlines. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have some fun with this skull on here. We're going to use some Zandri dust, and because we've got the matte varnish over it, this paint's going to take to it quite nicely. So we're going to thin down your Zandri dust quite nicely, and just paint over the skull. And just using the detail that's actually there, and just fill it in as you go. Just go carefully, just small little motions. You don't have to rush this or anything. And just carefully smooth it out. Again, if you go over the lines a little bit, it doesn't matter so much because we can tidy this up with some black afterwards again. It'll be alright. Then once we've got all that filled in with Zandri Dust, we are going to take a little bit of Agrax Earthshade, and we're going to use this as a tint over the Zandri Dust. Not like a wash, so we don't want it to be pooling up. We're just going to apply the Agrax Earthshade over the skull thinly to add a nice little darker brown element to it. Then after that, we're going to use some Shapti Bone. We're going to start painting it on like it's a highlight. So focus up around the top of the skulls, any teeth, eye sockets, and again just go nice and slowly, and it'll come together quite nicely. And for the finishing touches to this decal, we're going to use some Screaming Skull, just to do a final edge highlight on it. And then with that, that's this decal spruced up quite nicely, and it looks very convincing for some freehand. But without a proper good look, you'd probably never know it was a painted over decal. And now we've got the final stages, which is the base. Now, when it comes to that, there is always the legendary hunt for that mythical paint that's a good match for Goblin Green. Well, some people might disagree with that, but I generally can't be bothered with that nonsense. So I found a nice close one, which is Warboss Green. Works very nicely for it. So I like to put a coat of that nice and smooth down on the base. Then over that, use some Scenic Glue or PVA glue, whatever, but I like Scenic Glue. And then I use this flock. You can get it generally from any model railway shop or anywhere that sells modelling terrain or model trains or anything like that. And I find it's pretty good, because even back in the day, I didn't like doing the sand dry brushed with green and yellow anyway. I preferred this. So once you've got that on there, you then seal the whole model in. I like to do it with a bit of satin varnish. And then there we go. There's one finished Death Company. And with that, that is the Death Company finished. Now, I've got to be honest, for a nice simple paint job for tabletop standard, I think these look extremely nice myself. The little touch with the decal adds a nice little finishing touch, and the Warboss Green is as near as I can get to Goblin Green without driving myself insane trying to find a good substitute. Now, as you can see, I think the edge highlight going just a little bit brighter on the black instead of going your darkest blue or darkest grey and just going a little step up really does help the edge highlight to stand out a little bit extra on there. And the power swords are just a lovely little retro touch. Now then, if you've made it through to the end of this video and you like what you see, hit subscribe and then do the bell icon as well so you can actually get notified of the videos. And once again, if anybody is interested, I do commissions, so there will be an active link down in the description below for my studio. And with that, stay smiling and keep the old hammer alive.